Hey, folks, welcome to Snowpal's Software Development and Architecture Podcast. We have a special guest with us today. Kramer's less a guest as we go and more part of the team, larger team at Snowpal, if you will. We've had several wonderful conversations with Kramer. We're going to pick up from where we left off by virtue of introduction. Kramer is the founder and chief product officer of Cooperative Computing. Kramer is dedicated to transforming lives, is the father of 9, still married to the wonderful girl, and lives in Dallas, Texas. While Kramer lives in Dallas, currently, as he's speaking to us today, he's in a different part of the world. I let Kramer, spill the beans himself. Kramer, thanks for again joining today's podcast.
Thank you so much. It's good to hail you here from the down under of down under, right? New Zealand is a little more down under, and I'm in New Zealand for the next couple of weeks, enjoying some time with a client that we have over here, helping them get into the automated economy.
Brilliant. And you've kind of gotten out at the right time. It's snowing in Dallas and most parts of the country here. So you've gone into the warmer part of the world, if you will. This is great. To start this conversation, I'm going to ask something I started to ask folks recently, which is, what is your most favorite food item? And I'm going to ask this very specifically, not to America, right? Since you're actually traveling right now, you're a quote unquote a New Zealander for the next 3 weeks. In your travel right now, Kramer, what is your favorite dish that you've been eating there? And if you can just kick off the conversation with that.
Yeah, New Zealand is an amazing country. They've got, a lot of fruit. It's so vastly green here. And it's an amazing country for all its vegetables. But the thing that I really enjoy here, they do a fantastic lamb. And they do this lamb roast that is seasoned just perfectly with all the right vegetables and all the things that go with it. And so it's a roasted lamb, and it's just an amazing, amazing result. I love actually tasting it and eating it. That's my favorite thing here.
Perfect. So for anybody else traveling to New Zealand, there you go, right?
Get that
give that
lamb.
give that a
That's
shot.
correct.
Absolutely. Perfect. So today's topic, we're going to pick up from where we left off. And again, folks, if you haven't watched the previous conversations, I highly recommend you do so, just to learn, about automated economy in general, but also a lot of details with Kramer's wonderful experience, in that and other spaces as well. So definitely check that out. But this conversation, and we're going to keep each of these episodes. You can watch them independently. So think of it as like Seinfeld or something. You'll still get the benefit and the enjoyment of watching it. But again, if you watch that in entirety, in sequence, if you will, you're going to get more benefit out of that. Today's topic is going to be impact of automated economy on global economic growth. That is essentially the topic. Let me say that better next time, the second time. Impact of automated economy on global economic growth. To kick this off, Kramer has something to share. Perhaps Kramer, if you don't mind, you can just get started
You
with
bet.
that.
Yeah, let me pull this up. And this is from a business document that we have created for some of our partners. And it's important. Here we go. Screen. Screen. And it's going to take a blip for a moment.
Yep, no worries. It's actually rendering
Okay.
right now.
Let me know when you can see it.
Yep. I've seen that the tool, sometimes it actually, you have to do it 2 times. I've actually run into it. Do you mind just stopping it again, Kramer, and doing? Okay, no, it shows up. It shows up.
Here
Never
we
mind.
go.
It shows up.
Here
Yep,
we
I can
go.
see.
Okay,
Yep.
perfect. Okay, so I'm going to cover 2 things that are actually gives you a visualization of why this is important. So the automated economy, and last time I went through this a little bit, the automated economy is where things get hyper automated, hyper personalized, and data-driven decisions are moving the data around inside that environment that's automated. So this is a report that was done for Statista, and this shows you on a global basis what is the GDP generated across all the economies, and in that economic perspective, how much of that has been automated, either through digital transformation in its entirety, or digital enablement in just a portion of it, right? And so you can see here it has continued to grow since 2018, which was at 13.5, and this is measured in trillions, 13.5 trillion. We're now at 53 trillion in GDP generated out of the automated economy through companies and businesses, whether those are global or not, that are generating their income into that GDP at $53.3 trillion. Now, the cool thing to see about this is you can see how much has been done as a percentage, right? And so in 2022, we crossed the line where you've got as much of the GDP being generated out of the digital side as you do in the non-digital side. And look at what happens now with growth. So you can see, you're trucking along, the curve is there, you get a couple of spikes, right? And then you have 2021 come along, COVID-19 takes a whack on us for a little bit, but then you see this massive spike in growth, right? And this is just a representation of why the automated economy is going to so dramatically change the world from an economic growth perspective. And the ability for companies to now operate on this frontier, utilizing digital automation and all the things that go around it, the hyper personalization, the way that you interact with the systems, what you can get access to, share a wallet, all the things associated with it. You can see what that spike has done, and you can see how well it starts to align with what is occurring as the growth of the automated economy is taking place. So
And
it's an
sorry.
amazing representation.
No, that's great. In that diagram, Kramer, if you go back to the chart for a second, I noticed that, the first one there. If you scroll up a little bit,
Okay,
just the one yep. So it was 13.5, and, it's grown 4 times, right? There's a 400% increase in like
that's
5 years,
correct.
literally. Between 2020 and 2022, it's almost like it's doubled. And even given the fact that this is in trillions, right? Not billions, obviously, it's in trillions, the growth is still there. And then I wonder, in the next, like, does that other chart show a projection like where we might be, say, in 5 years from today, from 53 trillion?
If you look at what has occurred here, it doesn't give you an exact example. We have another paper, it's confidential, that we put together by industry that shows what has occurred in this growth around digital enablement. So you can see that this here growth rate, right, was a little over 50% higher, right?
Right.
And then you saw even more than that. And then it started to flatten out a little bit, right? So the low hanging fruit took place from 20 to 22. And then in 23, you see it growing. And this growth rate is about 14%. And we believe it's going to run anywhere from 14 to 20% year over year. Now, it's 14 to 20% of the total GDP. So if you look at it at the market scale, right, what is the opportunity that is going to be available for GDP growth on an economic scale? You have to come down here and you have to look at what's happening with the GDP as a whole, right? So this is measured in billions as well, but you have 125 trillion, right? That is the global growth that is predicted for 2027. And so, as you can see, this growth factor from where we're at today in 2023, right, you've got almost 25 trillion in growth. As a percentage, it's going to be a massive number. So while the growth has slowed, it's still a huge number that's going to happen as a result of economic uptick, as well as I think the friction in what's being done in a non-automated manner is going to go down, as an event of what's occurring globally, and as economies start to connect more and more through hyper digital interfaces.
And then also, to add to what you're saying, that if you go back to the previous chart, I noticed that, in 2023, it's almost even, right? Like if you took 2018, it's 13.5. That number doesn't add up to 100 on the first bar, so I'm going to ignore. But essentially, it was like, say, 13 or 20% of the overall economy. If I have to just make some assumptions there, but in the very last one,
That's right.
we are seeing that it's over half, right? Over half the economy.
That's correct.
Uh, because sorry, I read that as percentages, not as numbers. So maybe I don't know if it's a half or if it's
Well,
53 trillion,
these are numbers. So this is 53 trillion. Okay.
right?
And this is 49 trillion, but you can start to see the half mark was right around 2022 if you look at it just from a mark perspective, right? And
Correct.
you can see now that over half, and this um, continues to, we believe that this will continue to stay roughly at the same growth level, right? So, while this growth level from 44 to 53, right, was about $9 trillion in its total growth factor, that as a percentage of growth, right, that 7 or 8% growth factor is going to continue to go forward, and you're going to see the percentage of the total GDP eke up just a little bit, right?
Okay, and then
And
so
so
basically, sorry, go ahead, Kramer.
and so you get the compounding effect is that happens as a result of the growth in the economy being able to spread its reach out farther, what things are being done economically that can be digitized, right? You're going to see that the digital factors will only increase drastically again once you get true robotics in place, so that those things that are done by the people that are not able to be done by robots today, when the robotic systems come online, you'll see another spike in what's happening with the um, economic factors when it comes to the digital growth.
Perfect. Which means, can we say that as the economy grows, for every dollar that's being spent, I think, yeah, you can stop sharing if you want. I think we got the gist of that. So for every dollar that's being spent, would it be fair to say reasonably that 50 cents of it might actually be spent in the space of automated
In the
economy and digital
automated economy.
enablement?
100%. Yeah. And we have another chart that's in that other document that shows that spending. And it's about 52 cents right now is done through the automated economy. And when you
Wow.
see more permanent goods like automobiles and things of that nature, so you've got large purchases that are now being made through the automated economy and being produced through the automated economy. So we're going to see that number go up as it goes forward.
Which means, just to ask these fundamental questions, right? For me to digest it and for the audience to understand as well. Let's say years ago when you purchased a car, and I know you would mention that as an example in one of our previous conversations as well. There was a lot less automation. Now when you're purchasing a Tesla, right? It's more, pretty much you're not going anywhere. You're making all of those purchases sitting right in front of your machine. So does it mean even a purchase of a vehicle, say compared to 10 years ago, how it was done is dramatically could be is quite different, at least for Tesla today, but it's going to probably be applicable to other car companies for all we know. Can I then say that each of all of those changes and differences are contributing to this 52 cents of every dollar being spent in that space?
That is correct. Yep. And so as you see the measurement systems of what is inside the automated economy, as that number starts to grow, right? It takes into effect where the transaction happened and how the transaction occurred, not just how, but where. So you sitting at home, I gave an example the other day. It used to be that if you were 10 people in an office and you wanted to order food, you send the link around so that everyone could go online to see what it was they wanted to buy and someone called the order in. Now you have stores like Chipotle and others that I send the link around the office and everyone puts their food order in. I hit buy and it goes to the corporate card, of course, and
Right.
that purchase gets made, right? So all of these things that are occurring to digitize how we interact, as well as the hyper personalization that goes along with it, are growing personally. And then the communities that are being engaged around that digital experience are starting to become, you know, hyper interactive. It's so cool to see things that are occurring. I have a friend, he has three friends in Tokyo, he's got two in South Africa, and he's got three in Switzerland, and they will go shop and do things online, right? And have experiences during that shopping experience online. And now, as you start to have the overlay systems that are coming, you take a picture of yourself, you all go, in a stand up visor, and you can now put on clothes that you can see whether they match, how they fit. As this digitization is occurring, we're going to see more and more human experience that's happening in that digital realm. As that starts to occur, it's going to increase the wallet share, if you will, that gets influenced by that digital experience across the global economy as well.
Makes sense, right? And in today's conversation, as we progress into it, we're going to talk about the impact of that in on different countries and also in on different industries, right? So let me start with, so you are currently in New Zealand, compared to say the US, and the there's lots of differences, in terms of the sizes. We know there's 5 million people in New Zealand versus like 330 million. So it's quite, it could be apples and oranges in terms of the size of the economy. But ignoring that for a moment, uh, what do you see as differences? I want to start at the highest level and say, what, automated economy in the US, you could take simple examples, if you will, an automated economy in a country that you're currently in right now, for instance, New Zealand.
Okay. And let's think of it on a couple of different dimensions. One, let's think of it at the personal level, and then let's think of it at institutional levels, whether they're businesses or whether they're government agencies. So one of the things that I think is quite interesting is a natural event of automation comes from the need to handle more and more volume. Typically, that gets done at a government agency or at a business level. If I'm dealing with 5 orders a month of something, Jane is everything. She takes the phone, she takes the order, she goes and picks it off the shelves, she ships it. When that has to scale, then you start to put technology in place to enable that scale. When you do that, you've started moving things into your digital realm, and then you can move them into the digital realm of the automated economy. So if you look at those two dimensions, one at the personal and then one at the business level, and whether that's a government entity business or whether that's private entity, I would tell you that at the personal level, right, if you take the US and the things that we have access to, for example, uh, here in New Zealand, I was here last quarter. When I was here last quarter, they were excited because they had, I think it was DoorDash was here.
Okay.
And, they were just rolling out services so that you could purchase and get things to come to your home. Now, in one quarter, Uber has come in, and literally here, I can buy all my groceries, all my wine products. Um, they'll stop by AutoZone and pick up parts. What Uber has done here is they've enabled me to basically have a shop for you experience and a pickup experience for that shopping. And they did that in one small quarter. DoorDash is still here, but it's just not as prevalent as what Uber has done. I cannot get that identical experience within the US. The reason it works so well here is because the whole island, you can drive the whole island in 6 hours. So when a guy has to pick up your laundry and he has to pick up the food and he has to pick up your car parts and the tour that he has to take to do that is much smaller, so it's much more adaptable for here. That could have never happened though without a digital platform that enabled them to quickly take and plug those things in and utilize that platform to make that experience happen here. So for a person like myself, an individual, the automation that I get access to is much higher. The personalization is much higher because of the size of the country I'm in. So when I go back to the US, however, and I look at things that I'm doing, for example, at the driver's license, for me to get a new driver's license took me about 13 minutes. I walked in, they saw my face, I filled out some documents, they did some processing, they sent me a little card that came on my phone. I clicked the card and poof, I'm done. That whole process for me a year ago was quite painful. Here in New Zealand, to go get that same driver's license has not been hyper automated. Why? Because the number of people that have to walk up to the counter to get the driver's license is not as high. New Zealand is a
Absolutely.
hub. It's a hub for transportation, airline transportation that goes in and out of some of the islands that are here. So their automation for how you get in and out as a customs process, they don't even have custom agents. Well, they're down to like 2 custom agents now. There is basically, you walk in, it scans you. You had to have applied for your NZTE ahead of time. All of that's been digitally automated. So as the volume goes up of something and it gets hyper automated, then it gets pushed right into the digital economy. And
Makes
so
sense, right?
tourism it makes sense 100%. So
Right. So in
if
that,
you look at that,
sorry, go ahead.
if you look at the perspective of personal, right? I've got a much better experience for some things here. If you look at the experience of business, I have a much better experience for things that are in the US. The opportunity now is to say, once I've got it working and I've got it working effectively, it reduces the cost for implementation so that you can implement that on a global scale and you can go into economies that have the wherewithal to implement, but don't have the knowledge or the skill to implement, that can utilize someone like a cooperative computing that can help get that deployed. That will boost that economy. You saw the numbers, right? You saw the comparison. That will boost that economy. And in some areas, you could probably grow an economy 200% by just digitally enabling that economy.
So you mentioned you need more automation as the scale increases, right? So which is why New Zealand is actually a good example to draw some parallels and compare and contrast. So what if does it mean a smaller the nation, the lesser the population, the lesser the need for automation? Does it mean automated economy is going to make its way into countries like New Zealand much at a much slower pace because the need for that automation is not there to begin with? Or is the argument that, hey, you know what, yep, there are only 5 million people, which means there are only so many people to do whatever needs done, so in terms of proportionality the need is still there? Do we look at it as proportionality, so automation is still needed in New Zealand? Or do we look at it as, well, there's not that many people, so you could do things more manually than we can probably afford to do here in the US?
Yeah. So if you think of the construct around what an automated economy is going to allow you to do, right? It's going to allow you to accelerate the growth factors because you've eliminated the bottlenecks that are human intervention bottlenecks. So the consideration around what drove you to get there is different than the consideration around whether you would adopt it if that technology was already at your fingertips. For example, the ability for Uber to quickly come in and say, I've got the tech. All I got to do is configure it to do what I needed to do and tell my drivers, because I've already got the drivers in the platform, that you're now going to get paid to go pick food up. We just put it on the bill. And so either the consumer is going to buy it or they're not going to buy it, but the technology already existed. So they could rapidly configure and implement for the same quantity of people, by the way, but they took a service and made that service highly valuable to the consumer. And what's happened now is the purchase of that consumer goes up, because what I wouldn't get, I didn't, oh, I got to go get that. Yeah, I probably do sooner or later. Well, it's easy now. I can just go get it. So the purchase and acquisition that I'm doing as a consumer has gone up from a convenient standpoint. And as long as I've got the financial capability to do so, nothing stops me from doing things that before I would put off, I would forget about them, so on and so forth. So to answer your question directly, right, the need for something drives the funding of it for most agencies to do it. Once it's in place, the lack of understanding the art of possible is what typically reduces the scale at which it's rolled out. And the ability for someone to be your Sherpa to tell you what the art of possible is, what we do as a company, what we call digital enablement, right? I think those services are going to accelerate into economies that do need it, even if they're smaller in quantity, but the value of what the economic growth could be could, double or triple. So what grows the technology capability is typically demand. What enables that growth, meaning what can I do and how can I automate, is typically how fast I can now implement it once it's built. It's like cell phones.
Right. So essentially, can I then summarize that part of what you just mentioned here by saying, tell me if this sounds correct or not? The need for automation and automated economy may not necessarily arise from countries like New Zealand because there's fewer people, but we probably will find the need much sooner, right? Countries like China,
Yes.
India, the US. But once you have solutions for certain problems, those can easily be propagated to other
Yes.
nations because the problems are similar, even though the need didn't arise from there. Is that a fair way to
That's
summarize?
correct. That's a fair way
Okay.
to say. That's very well summarized. Yeah.
Okay, then let's say then we talk countries here, right? I want to touch upon this a bit more, but I also want to ask about culture and automated economy, right? Because I had a conversation with a guest, Prasanna, who I mentioned to you has traveled to every country in the world, and at some point I would love for him to join our conversation here. There's some facets of it that I think you'll find very interesting as well. uh, Culture and automated economy. Do you see certain parts of the world where this can be more seamlessly adopted just because the culture fits the notion of automation versus some other parts of the world? I'm just going countries initially, then we can go probably states and cities and whatnot, right? In your experience, Kramer, is there a difference? You're like, you know what, here automated economy is going to work just fine. Not industry, right? I'm just talking countries. And then you go to
Yes.
another place and you're like, you know what, going looking at the general culture and how things are being done, this may not be the best fit, at least for starters, to have automated economy.
And this is such an interesting and fantastic question for two reasons, right? One is what has driven the automated economy is bottom up. The consumer got their first taste of it and said, I want more. And what is the consumer? They want what they want when they want it at the value they want it. Okay, not price, but value.
Right.
They want that. So consumers started driving it. And when they got it at one place, they were like, well, I want that again. And the next place was competing. So the consumer driven side of the automated economy that drove the growth allowed someone to fund the development and the build of it, right? So now let's take culture. Let's look at culture and what does that mean for a minute, right? So if you have a culture where the economic spend of its citizens, which is typically in disposable income, is high enough, then you will see them drive that same adoption paradigm as fast as they possibly can because they have the money to spend, they want to spend it, and they want to have the convenience of what the automated economy brings to them. So that is one perspective. So as you look across a global basis and you look at all the countries and you say, where are disposable incomes available? And sometimes you look at a country and you think they don't have much disposable income. That is not true. Um, or you'll find it's not a truth, right? So within Mexico, if you think about Mexico and its total population and how much disposable income there is, it's actually fairly high. They don't have much in the way of automated economy yet, right? But the consumer now that goes across the border to the States has come back and said, I want this. And so they're pushing up into it at Mach 5 and they're driving the automation of that economy at an accelerated pace. There is I think it is the World Financial Organization has written an article on the growth in Mexico and how over the next 10 years, they will start to become a high growth economy specifically because of the automation factor of it. Not population
Wow.
growth, but
Wow.
because the disposable income on a per capita basis is high enough for them to actually spend the money. So if you look at a population like China and you go, oh my gosh, there's billions of people. Well, but how many of those billions of people have disposable income to get into the automated economy and do something with it? On a per capita basis, it's not as high as a country like Mexico. Well, technology wise, China's way ahead. The ability for
Right.
you to do something, WeChat is an amazing app, right? You can do everything in there, right? You can get married. You can do almost anything you can possibly want inside of WeChat. So they're hyper automated. They're hyper personalized, but the number of people that have disposable income to grow inside that digital economy is not as much as it is on a percentage basis if you look at a country like Mexico. So those two constructs, one, do you have the technology in place is one thing. Do you have the culture for the, and when I say culture, I mean, do you have the ability as well as the desire? You have to have both, right? Do you have the culture to take advantage of it? You will look at a country and determine is the disposable income there and can they do what they need to do with that disposable income in a way that lets the automated economy work. So if I'm in a country that is in, let's say Africa, right, and I'm making $200 to $300 a week, when I have a surcharge for delivery of $20 or $30 on things that I would purchase throughout the week, I'm probably not going to do that. I'm going to get on either my car or my bike and I'm going to go get that myself because I'm not going to spend that money. As the scale kicks in and the cost of what you're doing drives down, then the number of people who have access to it increase. So if we look at global economy and we break it down by those countries with disposable incomes, and you focus on those countries to say, that's where I want to put the automated economy solutions, both from a technology perspective as well as from a governance perspective. The government wants to adopt it, right? You will see the growth at the personal buyer level. The culture that's there will start to grow around it. Once they get the taste of it, they will start to adopt it and they'll start to consume it and start to use it more and more. So I don't think there's any single cultures, if you look across the globe, where it's a personal thing saying, I will never use it, ban that, right? I'm not ever going to use that technology from a culture perspective. There's certain, maybe people within the culture that have that view, but from a culture perspective, I don't think there will be. The second component is how well the government then adopts the consumption of it, right? Because
Right.
as the economic transaction occurs, you've got to be able to tax it. You have to be able to take that revenue and understand that revenue from your country's economic perspective. And you have to have a willingness then to operate that in a way that is, I'm going to say, to be as politically correct as I can, to not expose things that you might otherwise have not seen once you get into that automated economy. Okay. So
Okay.
as financial transactions start to flow between agencies in the government, between their citizens, once you start to see those transactions flow and you do less and less from a fiat currency perspective, right, then things get exposed that used to be done as cash under the table. You wanted to pay someone off. So once your citizens want to adopt it, your government has to accept the adoption of that to get it to scale at the level you do to have your full country into an automated economy to take advantage of the growth adoption that can happen as the ability of that come into fruition. So both of those are key characteristics to determine whether you're ready as a country with the culture inside that, one from a government and a political culture, one from a people and expendable um, cash that they have on hand culture. Those are going to be the two main drivers culturally that are going to enable a country to take full advantage of the automated economy or not.
Kramer, this is very technical. So just to recap, there are 2 points you mentioned, and you gave a lot of details there. So I'm going to tell folks just pause the last between minute 24 and 32 and take notes literally, because you've said a number of things there, Kramer. They're all important, but I just want to capture the fact that you have to give it a couple of listens before you actually digest the magnitude of what you mentioned there, right? Because these are points that are extremely clear, and you articulated, like I've said before, beautifully. But I want to call out for the fact that they're highly technical, right? Highly technical. So if as somebody who's watching this, if you don't understand the breadth of it in a single listen, I highly recommend you just pause it, take some notes, do some research, follow up with the next point that you mentioned there, right? Because the two items that you mentioned as a response to my question, I think they were very specific answers, right? Extremely specific answers. And as I go back to even watch this, I'm going to come back to you with more questions, right? Because one of the things you mentioned was there's no cultures that are averse to accepting automated economy. Maybe there are aspects of certain cultures where some automation is more seamless than other aspects of automation, but it's nothing to do with, hey, no, we like it or we don't like it. Because you took the example of Mexico, as in in the next several years you're saying it's going to be a lot more automated than it probably is today, for instance, right? What I want to do is probably take a minute to draw a diagram, nothing pretty, because I don't draw great diagrams, but I just want to capture some of this into visual illustrations, right? So people understand in the 13 to 52 trillion dollars that you just mentioned there, just to digest the size of those numbers and the importance of automation and digital enablement, right? As you mentioned, cooperative computing, it's essentially you're in that space of digitally enabling countries, companies and countries as well. I want to sort of draw a quick diagram to see the impact of this, just not at the industry level, Kramer, if that makes sense, but more at the country level, right? So let me share my
You bet.
screen here. Okay, tell me once. Do you see my screen?
I do.
Okay, I'm just going to draw something. Okay, I'm just going to. I only understand a few shapes, so bear with my basic diagram here. Okay. economy. I'm just gonna take a different one. Say, oops. If you're playing Pictionary ever, you don't want me to be in your team. I'll tell you that much. Yeah. This is at
I'm right
least the
there with
tool.
you.
This is the tool doing it, so don't be as sloppy as if I were. It's as an engineer, I think a lot of it visually, but it's just that the
Yes,
diagram sometimes makes sense to you and your team because they're used to it. And
yes.
when you work with somebody else, it just takes them a little of time to understand. Okay, there are only like four shapes in Krish's world. Okay, uh, I want to have these represent countries, Kramer, just to sort of visually
Okay,
represent the size
this
of
is
automated
perfect.
economy, right? So I want to
Yes,
start
yes.
with the country, we both live in and we're part of, uh, but it doesn't have to be that. What would be the first? I'm going to, say, let's start with where you think this impact is going to be the largest in terms of, just the size and magnitude of it in the next, I would say, 2 to 5 years.
Okay. So, and the impact, I'm going to measure that impact in a couple of different dimensions. Number one is GDP growth. Okay.
Okay.
And number two is the value, the real value of that GDP growth. And I'll talk through the components of that in a second, right? So if you think of GDP growth and what the automated economy can do for a country, right? And you think of which countries are going to actually begin to achieve the highest growth factors on the GDP. So some countries are at such a scale with what they've done that they're going to see the highest growth rates because of it. Okay. And one of those countries is India, right?
Okay.
India GDP growth rate as a realized GDP growth can you could grow 23% year over year for the next 3 years on GDP if it truly embraced 100% the automated economy. Why? Because the manufacture of textile products, pharmaceuticals, and parts and other industrial goods is extremely high within the country.
You know what, Kramer?
But
I'm
they're
going to capture
all
this as you go. Sorry.
okay
Should I then start this first one with India?
with India.
Okay,
India's got a
perfect.
huge opportunity here, huge. And that opportunity, that first dimension about what do I produce and how do I get to it from an automated economy, a global economy basis, okay? The growth there is because you have um, items, things that are produced that are very tangible and that move around well when the automated economy can kick in to actually move them around. And let's take lumber as a supply product, right? While it's going down in the use of construction, the ability to move lumber around at any stock size and level has been difficult to do um, in a smooth manner because it isn't plugged into the automated economy. So, how much lumber do I have? How much can I cut? How much can I use? How can I get on a boat? So on and so forth, right? So, you guys in India, right? The Indian um, economy has the ability at its fingertips to take the items that are produced and no longer just push them through distribution, but make them available on a global scale and itemize that distribution in a much more effective way digitally. And
Okay.
that gets to the digital supply chain. That's a whole topic in and of itself. We're about to see massive disruption on what
So
digital
Kramer,
supply chains are going
let
to do.
me interrupt you there, right? Sorry. So what?
Okay.
If you don't mind, what I want to do is first write this up, saying the countries that we think there's going to be the largest impact on. I'm sharing my screen again, so let me know if
Yes.
you don't see it. So let's say
I see
India
it.
is one. We put that. The next
India.
one. What should
Yep.
be? What should the next country be here?
I'm going to say African countries because you've got Tanzania, you've got Ghana, you've got those there are 4 or 5 African countries that have the ability to grow drastically on their GDP as well.
Okay, and I
Okay.
think just to add to that, because I think Nigeria is, I think one of the countries where the population is going to grow at a pretty, massive scale in the next decade or two. If I'm not wrong, is actually Nigeria, right? So there are countries in Africa that are growing in population, so which means that makes complete sense in the context of what you mentioned earlier about magnitude, the scale, and the need for automation, right? So Africa I'm just going to say as a continent.
Yes.
I'll adjust the size of these circles just to represent it in a moment, but let's just jot down the countries first. What is the third one here?
Yep. And then the I'm going to say the Indochina, which are the underserved, like Vietnam, countries of that nature that are
South
inside
Asian?
the South Asian. Yeah. You- Those are
Okay.
going to, and as you see economic stabilization drive government stabilization, right? That also creates this ability for that economic growth. So India's got a stable government. They just have to adopt the full automated economy. Africa's starting to get more stabilization as economies start to become less and less corrupt, and those economies start to help serve their people, right? And so as you see these things start to occur, you see the automated economies kick in, the growth starts to happen, and the ones that have led the way on the systems and technology to allow you to do that, the organizational and political structures to permit it to happen, they've gone through a lot of pain to already allow those. These countries get to take advantage of that quickly.
Okay. So Kramer, I'm still waiting for our own country to show up here. I'm
Yes.
just okay. So, but I don't want to force that in here. What
Yep.
was your natural position? What is the fourth one here?
Yeah. So if you think of and I'm specifically saying growth numbers, high growth numbers, and the value of that growth, right? Um,
Right.
we're probably, if you think of the next country showing up here, yeah, and you think of where it starts out, it's probably Latin American countries that are going to fall into the next category. And, those are Mexico, Colombia, and as you head down the Latin continent, those countries that are within Latin America. And
Okay. Let me
so
say.
why
You said Mexico. You said
Colombia,
Colombia.
Peru, right? As you head down the Latin continent
Okay,
and you
and
head
so on
into
and so
Latin
forth. Right.
America. Yep.
How
Yes.
about Brazil? Brazil should be in this list.
And Brazil is probably, it's going to be after Latin America. And here's why, right? So if you think of what generates the most economic value and growth is when the government is, when I'm going to call it open corruption goes down. And Brazil has struggled with getting open corruption out of its government. Why? The people can't trust it. For automated economies to truly scale that are robust, the open corruption has to get limited relatively quick. So let's just take El Salvador. The two things he did: one, he had to get rid of the corruption, and it was a brutal process. Two, he had to put it on an economic basis that allowed that to happen and stabilize it quickly. So his move to Bitcoin, right, in that economy started to stabilize it, but he had to get corruption out of the way.
Okay.
So
So
as you
that's
look at
why
these
some of
countries,
what the government impact is that you mentioned earlier, right?
right,
The role that the government plays. So in terms of just capturing this, Kramer, so it's India, it's Africa as a continent. We said
Africa,
South
South
Asian
Asian, and
countries.
Latin
We
America.
said
Yep.
Latin America, and then where do we show up here?
Yeah, so the U.S. as a growth from the impact of the automated economy on a uh, CAGR basis, right? You look at it annual year over year, we're probably down in the 10 or 11. Why? Because our economy growth has slowed down. Our economic growth has slowed down. We're not going to gain the big benefits from automation. We're going to gain the benefits from economic growth, and then the automation will follow through on it. Now, as a country, we've got probably the most stimulated economic patterns that there are on a global basis from a growth perspective. If you just line us up against Western countries and non-Western countries, and you look at economic growth that is just natural growth, not because you suddenly turned on something that let people buy, but because we have a sustainable model, we have a fairly high growth rate. But the automation of our economy is not going to accelerate it at the same rate as what you're going to see in these other countries. So we're going
Wow.
to be
Okay.
down in the number 11, if you 10 or 11, if you put them all in a list.
Wow. So that's very interesting. Okay. Now the other big country missing here, China. Where does China show up in
China.
this list?
Yeah. So China has the opportunity to become a stellar growth. The problem, you have remember the two conditions. One, do I have disposable income that's growing? So my middle income is growing, the people that are in my middle income bracket are growing. And China's going to struggle with that over the course of the next, 5 to 10 years as to how to continue to have the middle class grow, right? As you distance yourself from people who buy your goods and services at volume rates, and I'm not talking oil, but I'm talking just natural things that are produced, and you can do so without economic friction, right? Then that gives you the opportunity for economic growth at accelerated rates. China's going to struggle to continue to get that growth and will probably fall under, they'll probably be number 12 or 13 from a growth from automated economy, just automated economy, because the disposable income for their citizens is not going to grow at the rate it needs to make the automated economy have the same impact on them economically.
Okay, so Kramer, this is very interesting learning even as I'm going here, right? So are we talking? If you had to put a, I know these are not, this is not empirical, these numbers, but it's very,
Yep.
it gives us a good representation. What are we talking here? Are we saying this is number one?
Yes. And
Wow.
the economic growth from automation in India, think of two things, right? And the times I have been there, I could get I could get food delivered. I could get almost anything done I needed to get done. But the way I had to get it done and the means I had to move around to get it done were not as elegant as what they could have been, right? Now, from a disposable income, India's done a much better job than most economies in focusing on how to get the middle income class to grow, because that is what grows the economy. Even if there's a big separation between who makes the most and who doesn't, you've got to get that middle income class growth to kick in and go, right? So India is going to have a huge growth capability because of automation, because they've now made things available on a global scale that has a population that's getting a more readily accessible disposable income.
You know what, Kramer, you hit the nail in the coffin there, because remember when I was talking to the other guest, Prasanna, who, remember I mentioned, who's been to all the countries. He's currently working out of India. He mentioned that we were talking, just for folks to know, we were talking about, travel and what kind of learnings comes out of travel, right? That doesn't come necessarily from a book. Some of it we know, some
Yeah.
of it, is not so obvious. He mentioned that even though a lot of us think of India as digitally growing, he said that when you actually are in India physically, you realize the magnitude of what that means. He says you go get coconut water from like a street vendor
Yes.
using like Paytm for getting that, for instance, right? He said the impact, and when you realize and actually benefit from that digital enablement, as you mention it, it is a lot more profound when you're physically in a place than when you're looking at it on, watching it on TV or reading it on in a
Yes.
magazine. So, I'm not surprised at all that that you picked that as the first circle there.
Yeah. And if you think of what it does, so because culturally India's going to adopt it 100%. You've got all the tech capability there. They're going to start to drive that tech into the economy because it's been built. What you struggle with in a local economy like India is, even if they built it for India, the revenue they get from it's not as high if they build it and they stick it into the US. So
Right.
who are they going to build the software for? They're going to build the software for people who are going to buy the software. But once you get it up and you get it running, and all I have to do now is implement inside an environment, and I'm not spending, it's 20 to 30 million dollars to get some of these platforms built out the door, get them tested, get them fully functional, get them at scale. Now I've got it up and running. It's a SaaS platform, and I've just got to add more tenants to it. And I want to decrease the price so I can have that be available to the economic situation that those vendors are in, right? That within India, I can now do so, right? And I can make it price competitive in that local economy. And now I give them access to things that I've already demonstrated I have access to in other economies in a way. For example, let's take microloans. Okay. If you want to accelerate purchases, put in a microloan system that enables you to get funding to someone who's able to pay back at a small rate, a small amount, and will do so faithfully. And they want access to things that microloan gets to them. It's impossible to do that through a natural banking system. It doesn't work. There's no scale to it. So you've got to put a platform in that lets the microloan take place, lets the paycheck come into the microloaner, take the money out of it trustworthy, and then get the asset to the person that wants it. You will just that alone will lift you 20 to 30%.
I'm
India's
thinking we need to
primed for
so,
that.
Creeper, sorry to interrupt you there. I was just thinking, I have to find a tool that actually translates what you're saying to a diagram as you're actually stating that. I'm gonna spend some time figuring that out because whatever you just said in the last 2 minutes about the micro loans, I'm trying to visually imagine that. The only way I can do that is by stopping you after every sentence, which is going to interrupt your flow of thoughts. So I'm going to figure out a way. So, imagine you saying that and it's actually being represented in real time as a visual diagram, which would be phenomenal, actually. Sorry, a complete digression because
Yes.
I jotted that down, microloans. I want to get into that as an example. But let me go back to the diagram just to complete this, right? If you could just humor me
Yes.
here.
Yep.
In terms of, so this is already clarifying a lot of muddied waters to me, right? Which is kind of why the two of us had decided that we'll start representing some of our conversations visually, even if it's
Graphically.
only like
Yep.
3 or 4 shapes or whatnot. I want to do one more thing here. So we've got an idea for the countries. I wonder if we could, if it's not terribly difficult, can we give some numbers to the rest of these circles as well? We have 1, 11, 12, and 13. What should I put Africa as?
Yeah. Number two. And
Okay,
this will be interesting to see as we look back on this in a year, right? And
absolutely. And then just
if
to
you went
call
into
out,
the yeah,
sorry, go ahead.
if you went into Africa, I have to take some time to go offline to identify the real countries, but you know, there's regions of that will go faster than the others. But Africa as a continent's number two. Um,
Okay, let me
South
do this.
Asia,
I'm gonna put a color here because we're gonna come back to what those countries are. So that's like I'll just say work in progress, or let me pick a different color. Countries is sort of to be discussed, right? We'll have to figure which countries make the most impact. I'll just put a piece of text here. Countries. Okay. And then what should South Asia be?
South Asia is number three, and Latin America is number four. There may be. No, I'm still going to stick with my South Asia. Latin America has the opportunity to outpace the South Asian, but the problem I think is Latin America. To your point about cultural adoption, right? They've got the economic capability to do it, but the adoption of things and the rate at which they get adopted from a population characteristic perspective, if you look at Mexico's population, there's an aging population, and the young population that will adopt these more rapidly will have to introduce it to the aging
Hey,
because
Kramer,
the money is
I'm jotting down these points, but I'm gonna come back
okay.
to each of them and pick your brain a lot more
Okay,
about each of those items because they are broad topics in themselves, right?
that's right.
So I want to,
Yep.
but there are a couple of important circles we've missed here, or I
Okay.
missed here. I want to add them
Yep.
in Europe,
Yes.
and
Yes.
then I want to
And if you think of Europe, are you you're going to take UK out of that, right? Or you're going to leave
okay.
UK in Europe?
Okay, you know what? Great point. I was not exactly certain, but you know what? Let's just
Yep.
do that. I'm going to add
Yes.
UK and then I'm going to say rest of, and by Europe
Rest of the world.
also, I guess, let
Yep.
me actually break this down. Now you can see my skills around diagramming. It's in full display, but it's all right. Okay, it's New Zealand. I'm going to do this. I'm a better diagrammer in my mind than
Yes.
what might show up here in my own defense, if you will. I'm going to say Western Europe, uh, and I'm
Yeah.
also going to say, well, I'm going to take some
Eastern Europe.
liberties here with all
Yes.
respect to everybody in Europe because there's like Central Europe, there's Eastern Europe, but I'm just going to be a little bit lazy and then going to
Yes.
say rest of Europe here, right? Just to
Yes.
keep it small enough. And then we have I'm going to put New Zealand and Australia up here, right? Now, tell me we'll go to the sizes after the numbers. Just if you could just
Yep.
give us some numbers here, Kramer.
Yeah. So the UK is higher up on the list than the US, right? And so,
Okay,
it's probably going to be in the number nine
nine.
range.
Okay, that's
And
fine. We'll go with
I'll
that.
kind of describe why that is. And then Western Europe is going to be in the number five.
Rest
And
of
then rest
Europe.
of Europe is going to be probably around 12. And I'm trying to keep the picture of the numbers in my head as we go. So this
Oh
is
wait, hang
good.
on.
So,
12 is taken. 12. I think. Let me
yep,
just say China is 12. Let's say 12 is taken. What should this be?
yep, that's 11. Yep,
Okay, and then we have Australia
yep.
and New Zealand.
Australia is like way down on the list. Australia and New Zealand are farther down just because of GDP growth as a whole. But
Okay, I'll just say 20 or
yep,
something, right? Okay.
yep,
So I'm going to go to the size here, but just to digest this, just to recap, right? What we are saying here is, Kramer, you're saying when we talk automated economy, we are talking
and this
53
is
trillion.
automated. Yeah, automated economy focus. Yes, yes,
Yep, automated economy. And I'm just going to say, I'm going to put a number here to give a little bit of context. 2023, $53 trillion, right? Let's say 53 trillion USD. Yep. Yep, it looks a little odd when I write it like that, but I guess hopefully it makes sense. Yep. Okay, so we're talking India, a population of 1.4 billion. It's a
yes,
growing economy. A lot of it is becoming digital. Lots of things happening. We'll talk about. I also want to see if it makes sense to you as we progress in our conversation. We want to take different countries, different industries, different segments, and just break it down as much as possible, right? So things become clearer and clearer and clearer
yes,
to folks such as myself who are not as well versed with the concept of automated economy or digital enablement as you are. So that's India. And then number two, we've said Africa as a continent. We have to get into the countries in Africa, whether it's how much Nigeria would play a role, or what about South Africa, or Western African countries. We have to figure, just get a little bit deeper into
yes,
Africa as a continent. 54 countries, I think, in that continent, and then we have South Asia, so we have to just get into the countries as well: Philippines, Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, Vietnam,
Singapore. Yes,
Cambodia, and then the Japan. Uh, I want to say I don't know if Japan comes under South Asia, but still, Japan, Korea, and so on. Then Latin America, if we want to talk about it as well. So I would have, to be honest with you, Kramer, I didn't expect us to show up as number one. And when we started drawing, I did not think we were number 11, right? So that's clearly an element of learning right there, right? So we are at number 11, give or take. And then China is actually a little bit behind us. And we'll see why and what it means because, we are one third the population. But, in terms of global economies, we can also put these numbers down in terms of general overall GDP of each of these countries and how the automated economy and the percentages of automated economy dollars translate to GDP percentages, right? And then we say UK is not okay. Let me digest this. UK is actually much lower than the rest of Europe, like Germany, France, and
yes.
Spain, and other parts of Europe. Actually, much higher. Oh wow, so they are just a little bit behind Latin America, much ahead of. Oh, hang on, sorry, I think I reused the numbers, Kramer. My apologies. What
Uh,
should I say? We are number 11. What should I call Europe as? Rest of Europe as?
so
And
we
then
ought to probably make rest of Europe. We ought to make China. Rest of Europe would be number 13. Do we have a 13 in use? No.
we do not have 13, so we will
Yeah,
go.
13.
So rest of
Yep.
Europe is actually just behind China, and then
Yes.
between UK, so Western Europe comes first, and then UK, and then rest of
UK.
Europe after that, and then Australia. Just because uh, just to the population of Australia and New Zealand put together is probably like 35 million, right? 35 million, just to give context to some
Yes.
so the reason some of these are lower down is because there's just fewer people in those places. Now the second part of this diagram, just to complete this, if I could even call it complete, partially, is representing the sizes of these circles, right? So if you could help me with also,
Yes.
first of all, let me ask you, does that make sense to sort of represent them as those
I
sizes?
and the size being the economic growth, not the population, right?
No, yeah, exactly. Like, now, does that make
Yes,
sense to represent it that way?
it does. Yeah,
Okay.
and yep,
So what should, and this is going to be tricky because first of all, I'm on a laptop, so I have to move this back and forth. But beyond that,
yeah,
it just, we can adjust it. Let's say I want to go, with the biggest one here, because something could be number 9, but if number 9 is bigger than number 2 because of
yes,
the size, I think that's
yes,
important, right? In terms of weightage and being
yes,
factoring that in, that is quite important as well. So what should, let's start with India as a base, right? What should, I'm going to make it, and how big should I make this?
yes. So, I would say we should expect from automated economy, okay, that you should expect 50% of their economic growth to come from the automated economy. Okay.
Okay.
So if you look at GDP growth, and I'd have to go back, I've got a bunch of charts on this. If we just look at
Kramer,
GDP growth
Kramer, what you just said, sorry, was 50% of growth would come,
from
might
the automated economy.
to come from automated economy. Folks, I'm just going to say AE for automated economy. So anywhere I say AE, that's what it means. Okay, Kramer, sorry, keep going.
Okay. And and so that circle, if you look at, we'd have to see what that number is. I don't have the
Yeah,
exact
no, that's
figures in
fine.
my head,
This
but
is just
it,
a high level,
it,
right? Just a ballparkish, right? So let's say I
it's going
started
to be
with that
double.
size.
Yeah, it's going to be double everything else. So if you said that's the circle of where it's at, yeah, there you go. It's going to be much larger in comparative than all the rest of the growth from
Okay.
the automated
And I'm going
economy.
to go with, so let's say if I just made random assumptions here, tell me if
Yep,
these circles, I'll do a better job the next time to make it a little bit more quantifiable. But I want to see, I guess now that I'm drawing it, I'm realizing the sizes may not be reflective as beautifully. I'm going to have to put it into a
yep,
different chart, but at least I want to have some representation so they're not all equal. I started with
yes,
India being bigger. Can
yep.
I say, even though this is number 2, 3, and 4, are these all right in terms of
Ford's
these sizes?
Ford's going to be larger than Africa and um, the
Would this be bigger
Southern
than
Asian.
Africa? Would this be smaller than Africa, South Asia?
It'll be smaller.
Okay, so
Yep,
good. I'm good there. How are we in terms of India? Should we be half the size?
half the size. Yep,
Okay, and how about China compared to us?
China's about right because it's probably three quarters.
Okay, perfect. And then we have Europe. How should Europe be with respect to India
Make
here? UK.
Western and rest make UK smaller.
Okay,
There you go. Western and rest of Europe smaller.
okay. And then Australia, much smaller.
Yeah, make that about the same size as the UK.
Okay, perfect. This
That's a
is
great representation. I like this a lot. This is really
uh,
good.
thank you, and thank you for all of the data, right? And thank you for dealing with my poor choice of, I have, like, I only understand, like, all of my engineering diagrams to Kramer. They're not
Yes,
terrible, but they only have like 4 shapes, right? They all, I mean, it's basically
that's
right?
it.
It's squares,
It's
rectangles, rhombus, and whatnot. Because if it goes beyond that, it's too much for me to digest all of these shapes. And funny enough, the tools also don't give you that many to begin with, right? You just start with some simpler shapes. So just to recap what we're saying here, right? Just recap this conversation. I have no idea. I have to say we are like 6 minutes into our talk. No, I'm off by 56 minutes. I'm just kidding. It feels like it's like 6 minutes. Okay. So we were talking, you started with the chart that you had, Kramer, the diagram that, the chart, sorry, that said $13 trillion in 2018 to $53 trillion. And, I'm going to actually stop sharing for a second. The thing of this tool is I can either see this or see you, which is a little bit weird. I have to figure
yes,
out how to see both of us, the diagram and the person together. Okay,
yes,
I'm gonna say this before I stop sharing. So basically, we started with 13 trillion to $53 trillion. We're gonna see what that number translates to the next 2 to 5 years, right? Now, again, the
Yes.
number may not dramatically become 100 trillion, but because as the numbers grow, the percentages matter more, right? It's not so much
Yes.
the number itself. Every percentage means more as the base number is more. So $53 trillion as it's 2023, I think, right? Yep, last year. So we are in 2024 right now, and we talked about which countries it's going to have the most impact on. Just at least the highest level: India, Africa as a continent, South Asia, Latin America, the US, China, Europe, Western, rest of Europe, and then UK, and then Australia and New Zealand. Right? We've sort of covered. Uh, we don't have Antarctica. It's too small in terms of people and continent. So I think it's all right to just maybe even leave it off this list here. And then we, based on Kramer, you assign numbers. They are super helpful, right? To give context to it, just to digest the countries and the
I think
numbers.
the
And
only thing that we don't have as a circle here are I call them the Saudi Arabian, Iran, Iraq.
oh my God,
Um,
thank you. I have no idea how I
yep,
forgot about. Okay, cool. Thank you for actually bringing that up. Let me put that here. I'm gonna call it, Middle East.
Middle East. Yep,
Okay, and then I'm gonna draw a line here. Uh, I'm gonna be presumptuous and take a stab without asking you about one of the most important countries in the Middle East. Okay, I'm gonna tell me if I'm right or wrong here. I'm just gonna make the second one as UAE over here. Okay, and then I'm gonna say other countries. I know this is the way the tool it gets smaller and smaller. Okay, cool. Now tell me first the number, Kramer. What should the number be? Middle East as a whole,
yeah.
unless you want. Yep.
And Middle East is going to be down in the 20s. I don't know what is the lowest 20 we'd used
We
right
have
now.
20 for Australia and New Zealand. We have 20.
Yeah. Okay, so let's put this at 19 then, because the Middle East, and I think you captured it very well. Um, you've got Saudi Arabia that is going to adopt um, the automated economy quickly, but as a percentage of um, scale, it's not going to be as high. And UAE is highly automated in many cases, right? So the quantity, though, of the disposable income growth is not going to grow that much. So as they
Okay.
automate, they're going to do it for more operational efficiency than they are they'll get more operational effectiveness out of it than they will economic growth. The only
Automation for
area,
more operational efficiency
yeah,
than for
economic growth.
economy. Kramer, just a random question. Do you teach, like, as one of the things you do you teach like formally or informally, or you don't?
I have a class of students that I teach, but it's not economics and technology. It's around life skills and things of that nature. So that class is about 20-25 kids.
Okay, I can see if you do, it'll be awesome. This might come across as shameless, but it's not. I promise you. My question was very genuine, but I'm going to say that at Snowpal we also offer, like courses, right? We actually, started
Yes.
sharing our knowledge. Again, it was not my intent in asking the question, but I want to say that this will be awesome. I want to hit you up offline to talk about this because
Oh, that'd be cool.
I think you have this innate skill to actually be able to share. It's one thing to know; it's yet another to share, right? I think they have nothing to do with each other in my mind, right? Sometimes your
Yes.
people have a lot of skills, but they either are not, it's not in their personality to voluntarily share, or it's not something they enjoy doing. It could be a variety of reasons, right? I don't want to be judgmental, but I'm
Yes.
just saying, but there are
Yes.
others who want to do it. I personally enjoy doing it, right? I do these podcasts, also the technical podcasts,
So
because I want to
fun.
say that good or bad, right or wrong, I'm like, you know what, this, it is what it is. I want to, share what I do. And I feel like we have one more thing in common there. You might just be a better teacher, a way better teacher.
100%. I don't
That's
know
might be
about
the
that.
only difference. But that, okay, so I've jotted that down, but I want to put uh, the the size, right, before I forget. What should this size be? And again, let's just use
And it's
India
going to
as
be
an example.
about the same as rest of Europe. It'll probably be about that same size as rest of Europe.
Wow, this is very interesting. So it is actually different from what I might have had in mind. Okay, so let me actually even go here. I know we didn't do this for the rest, but if you don't mind, for Middle East, if we want to just size these three up, because I have something in mind,
Yep.
I want to see how wrong I am, right? What should the
Okay.
size of Saudi be compared to the other two?
From an automated economy perspective, it will be smaller than the UAE, and other
Okay.
countries will be smaller than UAE. Probably not that much smaller, but there you go.
Wow. Wow, I'm going to come back to this. This is very, very interesting.
And
So,
remember,
so
another thing that feeds this automated economic growth is the number of citizens with disposable income. UAE is a favorable importer of immigrants. It's
correct.
a favorable importer of immigrants. So you're going to see population growth continue there. And as they expand that population growth, so from an economic sustainability perspective, the UAE's two approaches, I don't think they're stated, but you can visually see them. One, permit people with middle income wealth to come in and spend money with us. So they make that favorable. Two, make that wealth spending capability extremely high. So they are increasing and improving the automated economy every day in their world. And they're also saying, let me bring immigrants in that will allow us to capture more dollar here in the country. And they make it favorable to bring outside dollars into the country. So
So, Kramer,
Dubai is
let
a
me ask you
central
this
hub.
then, right? Let me ask you this, which means, as we continue with that diagram, it seems to me
Yeah,
like the GDP and automated economy, they not directly proportional? It doesn't seem
they're
like it to me.
they are not directly proportional, but the ability to use them as a growth engine and then making it proportional to the growth engine is, it's got the high capability to do that, but they're not directly proportional.
Wow, I know as we continue our conversations, I want to make a note of this. Let me jot that down to ask you more. So, essentially, automated economy and GDP growth are not necessarily directly proportional, because that actually is not something I would have known. Yeah.
And let's give an example of why that's true. Okay,
Yep.
so if you've got a industrialized country that's GDP is tied to those things that you manufacture and you ship, right? Then there's going to be more proportionality to that than one that has services. Let's take Sweden or a country like that that's not producing a lot of manufactured goods. They're not shipping a lot of, you know, agriculture or things of that nature, right? So their GDP growth is services oriented. And therefore, the automated economy is going to have a bang effect, but it's not going to allow that growth factor against GDP to grow because Switzerland's GDP could grow 100% without automating much more because the automation that's in place would allow that GDP growth. So there's not a proportionality to it once you get it instantiated and put in place, and you're not a raw goods or a entity that's shipping something, right? So
So, which means, Kramer, sorry, just so I understand this, right? It's very interesting and difficult also to understand, just because it's complicated. We took India as a circle, right? The biggest one there, right? The GDP is growing, right? With the population,
yes,
I know the population is beginning to sort of stabilize. They're not going to continue to see an
yes,
increase, but the GDP has continued to grow quite dramatically, right?
yes.
So, but the reason it's the first one in the biggest circle is not is it not because of
It's
the
not
GDP?
GDP. That's correct. It is not. It is because in that country, the automated economy is not as large as it's going to be in the future, giving access to economic growth through that automated economy. So if you look at, and when we looked at the chart that showed here's the total GDP and here's 53 trillion and here's 46 trillion, that total, the pie is the same when you think of it on a country by country basis, right? So if, let's say, the GDP grows by 22%, which you have a high opportunity for a country, that's a big number, right? But
Right.
it's totally feasible if you think of it from an automated economy perspective, when you stop thinking of all the things you're generating for 3 to 4% inside a country. So if you have an economic growth factor on a country that is, because they're doing something that brings either revenue into the country from other places, or they're shipping more out of that country to be consumed by other places, right? Then those have to be whole goods in some fashion, one direction or the other, that are turning into the economic value. That percentage of what is automated and then consumed goes up as the citizens and the businesses can start to consume the things in that economy, in that GDP, as a nature of the financial transactions of growth. So if you did it cash, and there's still a large caste society within India, right? Then they're not in the automated economy. But as you start to get
Uh,
cashless and you start to pull the cash out and you start to go into the automated economy, then your GDP is supported by that automated economy transaction. And if you take Tata, for example, and Tata has a large plethora of things that are in their portfolio, but they have automobiles in that. And they could go direct to consumer and double, or, let's say, growth by 12%, that business, by making that available direct to consumer and having it shipped direct to consumer, and then dealing with what they need to from an import perspective, and not waiting for the growth of that automobile through the distributors and the rest of the system. That is what has allowed Tesla to own its own economic growth. It's not waiting for someone else to sell its cars. Its brand and everything is owned and perpetuated, and the solutions it has to put in market to allow its growth, it's up to it almost 100%.
so Kramer, this gets more and more interesting, right? And I have to jot this down, and I have to figure out how to represent this. What you're saying is, it makes sense. You're saying, hey, the just because the GDP is growing, let's say I'm going to take really small numbers just to make it easy for
Yeah.
conversation, not even trillions, or I'm going to take it in dollars, literally, right? Let's say the GDP
Yes.
is $100, for instance. Now it goes up, say, 15% to $115, right? There's 15 extra dollars. Now, oh, also, Kramer, I know I've lost track of time. Do you have time? Is there a hard stop at some point?
Let me look at my calendar right quick. I do have another call here.
Do we have like a 10 minutes to wrap this up?
Oh, you do? Yes, we
Okay,
do.
perfect. I'll plan to wrap it up and we can continue. So what I was going to say is, uh, let's say the GDP is $100. It grows by 15% to $115, right? There's a $15 growth.
Yes.
And now the automated economy doesn't have to grow proportionally. So if the percentage of, again, I need to pull up another spreadsheet, probably have to do this in sheets.
Yes.
If I'll do it, start the next podcast with actually being a little bit prepared with the sheets being there. For now, folks, please imagine this: $100 to $115 is a 15% growth. Let's say 50% of that, going by your previous chart, was automated economy's contribution to that, right? To the overall economy. It's not the GDP, but the overall economy. But let's say the overall economy, I'm trying to come up with these numbers here. All that I'm trying to say here is $15. All $15 are not going to be taken up by automated
Autonomy.
economy. Let's say $5 of that gets taken up by automated
Yes.
economy, right? That's a
Yes.
33% of the overall number. Now, if
That's
another
right.
GDP grew from $20, it actually grew a whole, I don't know, 50% to like $30, right? $30. Even though the growth itself is only $10, right? It's since the contribution of AI, automated economy, AE, to the GDP growth is not directly proportional. All that I'm trying to get at, in a very long-winded fashion, without numbers being jotted down, is that could be a much higher number. 20 to 30 could
Yes.
mean 8 of those dollars could be taken up by automated economy. So we are sure kind of interested in GDP, because if GDP doesn't even grow, there's no money to come from
You,
anywhere. But as much as we're
yes.
interested in the growth of the GDP, we are then saying, Kramer, that we are more interested in the percentage of automated economy and its contribution to the GDP, is what we are saying here, correct?
Well, that's one point of interest. The second point of interest is as you accelerate what, so if you take the economy as a dollar, okay, and if you accelerate how much of that dollar is automated, you accelerate the expansion capability of that economy. So the thing, every economy, every government should be seeking maximum automation in its economic distribution as fast as it can, because it'll allow its economy to grow exponential. And that
Mm,
exponential growth, when I say 20, any economist listening to me right now is laughing. There's no way you can't get a 20% growth on an economy. Ha, ha, ha. Oh, yes, you can. And you're seeing certain countries that are starting to see that economic growth. Once you get the right automated systems in place, then, and you have a strategy for what you're moving in and out of that economy to actually allow that growth to happen, right? Then the ability to grow that economy faster because you put the automation in place is directly proportional to how much you grew your automated economy by. So if you had a buck, let's put it into a picture, and you had 50 cents of that buck that was automated and it's growing at 4%. If you
you know what?
get
No,
that to
Kramer, hang on.
70%,
Kramer, hold your thought. Even though this is not the best way to represent this, I'm just going to do it
yeah,
regardless. That way, it's at least
okay,
okay. Maybe even pick. I don't know if I could pick. Uh, okay, that's fine. I'm just going to write it here. Okay, tell me. Right. Let's take these numbers. Right. Let's put some numbers. Some numbers. Okay, you started with a dollar, right?
if you had a dollar
Okay, I'm going to
and
start
50
with.
cents of that dollar was generated through an automated economy and 50 cents was not,
Okay, so folks, my apologies, is the worst way to represent this, but I'm just going to do it because I don't have. I can open sheets really quickly, but I'm just going to do it here. So 50% of this, Kramer, what did you say? Sorry, say that again.
let's say 50 cents of that dollar, and
Okay,
we're going to use cents for just a minute. Let's say 50 cents is automated and 50 cents is not. Okay?
okay,
And let's and
okay,
let's say that box is your current economy. Okay?
okay,
And then you start to get into 70 cents is automated on that dollar. When you
okay.
had
So
50 cents on that dollar automated, your growth potential, let's say, is 3%. When you
no,
get to 70,
Kramer,
your growth,
Kramer. Sorry.
yeah,
I'm just going to
yeah, go
just a little
ahead.
bit. Okay, tell me that number again. You said
There you go.
70%
And so let's say now you move to 70%, 70 cents, I'm sorry, 70 cents is
is
automated
automated.
and 30
Okay,
cents is not.
okay.
Okay. Now, on that 50 cents of automated, let's say you had another box under that that said potential growth is 3% of GDP, a 3% GDP growth.
You said
Okay.
below this, right? Below this box?
Yeah. Yeah. Because that economy, oops, I'm trying to point to it. That 50-50 economy is a 3% growth potential. That 70 to 30 is a 10% growth potential. The more you automate your economy, the faster you can grow the GDP.
You know what, Kramer? If you think this makes sense, that will do, because I think because the size of these things is starting to look a little bit awkward. This is actually a brilliant thing to discuss. I know you have to go. So should we say we will pick up our next
Yeah.
conversation from this part of the diagram?
100%. Yes.
Okay. So I think
Yes.
this is.
Now
I
on
want to
that
just.
square, on
Sorry,
the
let
first
me show.
square, put 3% growth potential because this is what you want to, this is the understanding. Economies need to understand this. People building stuff for those economies. So the growth potential of the left box is 3%.
3%, right? Okay. Okay. And this will.
And what
Is,
is that?
okay, but is this
And
is
what that
this
means?
enough details here to jog
Yes.
more than
Yes.
more than my memory,
Yes.
your memory the next time we do
100%.
this, right?
Yes.
Okay,
Yep.
perfect. Let me We'll just save that because that seems very exciting. So for people to sort of, just in terms of, I cannot believe it's like an hour and a half, right? It's like the length of a movie. It's just personally, it's been amazing. Uh, so let me ask you this, Kramer, if you had to summarize this, we talked about a number of things. Uh, what would be your closing comments for this particular podcast? And I titled it. Hopefully, the title still makes sense. Impact of automated economy on global economic growth. And I think a
Growth.
lot of what we discussed very much ties into the title, right? So if you could just summarize, your closing comments on our conversation today.
You bet. And I think there's kind of three things in the summary of it. One, um, as you think about automated economy and as you think about what it's truly doing, the underpinnings of it, it's removing barriers for consumerism to actually get to the retailer slash seller of the goods, right? And as you remove that barrier and you make it frictionless and you make it more and more adaptable to the personalization, hyper automation, hyper personalization, data driven decisions, it's just a natural thing to think about it and go, oh, I can see how that's going to create economic growth, right? So that automated economy is a primary factor and will become more and more. Industrialism did it for a while. The automated economy is going to do it next, right? It's going to cause the major capability for economic growth. That's number one. Number two, the proportionality. What is real and what is not real in that split of what can be automated and not automated, right, is important to understand in the stages that they will occur. At some point, we'll have full on Android robotics. And when we do, then the ability to do complex man tasks that today cannot be done by the less sophisticated robotics will kick in, and that will accelerate again what's happening in the automated economy. So, number two, we started to describe the ability for that economy to grow based on what it is the economy produces. That's the second concept. The third concept was the culture, both the political culture, right? Meaning, what does the government want to actually support to allow that growth to happen? Number two is the expendable income culture. What do I want to give up that will let me start to grow and spin through that automated economy? Those are two key concepts that I think we'd like our viewers to take away from. Our three key concepts are those three key concepts. One, the automated economy gets accelerated. The economic growth gets accelerated by the automated economy. It's just a natural law. You're not going to change it. Number two, making certain that you understand what you can accelerate and what you can't accelerate as an economy. It's a natural law. Number three, the cultural perspectives are founded in the government's ability to adopt it and in the people's ability to have the disposable income and the things that permit them to use that disposable income. If you think on those things, then the next time we come back, I think we'll have a great opportunity to kind of tell you how the numbers work and why those three things are important to understand in the automated economy that's going to drive the the revolution of man into space and so many other amazing things that are going to happen in our lifetimes.
I don't want to say anything to ruin the beauty of that summary and and those closing comments, Kramer. I want to leave the audience with your voice ringing in their minds with all of everything that you've beautifully captured there. All that I'm going to say is thank you very much, as always, for taking time to sharing your knowledge in this space and beyond, essentially. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having me here, Krish. It's always fun. And kia ora from New Zealand. It was good to be here with you.
And you have a wonderful time in New Zealand. And maybe the next time we do it, probably you're sitting on a beach. Maybe it's sunnier than it seems like it is today. Today, I know
Yes,
you mentioned it's cloudy and stuff.
next Friday should be good.
Awesome, folks. With that, we're going to end this podcast. Again, we have Kramer, who again, thanks to Kramer for taking time. Kramer is the founder and chief product officer of Cooperative Computing. I'll include the links to Kramer's company, so definitely, check it out and include Kramer's LinkedIn profile as well, so you have a way to reach out to Kramer. So with that, I'm going to end this podcast. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.